Why do you play video games? It's a weird question, and more importantly, it's probably a harder question to answer than what are some of your favorite video games. But why do you play? What is the feeling you're after? Maybe you simply play for an adrenaline rush. Perhaps it's about the pupil-dilating, fast-paced combat that you'll find in a fighter or an action title. Perhaps you care less about that and more about the fantasy of it. For you, the way this story progresses may be less important to you than the story itself. You might even play to temporarily allow yourself to fall into the illusion that you are living a different life in a different world. For many of you, it's less about the suspension of disbelief and more about socializing. Maybe you play so that you can work together with friends, or very deliberately work against them. It could be that you want a mind-bending puzzle or have an unyielding desire to be forced to think very long-term, where your decisions now could have huge ramifications in 5 turns. I'm sure many of you watching also love the idea of mastering an extremely tough challenge. Or you just like getting all the things. It's a question that makes you think much deeper than just picking a title that answers that question for you. It's a question that gets to the foundation behind what we enjoy most about this pastime. And it's a question that Quantic Foundry has spent the better part of the past decade trying to quantify and articulate. You might remember these folks from this video I did back in 2021, where we discussed how our personalities affect our taste in games, because much of what I talked about was research they had done. But the backbone of their data comes from this, their homegrown gamer motivation profile. It is a tiny questionnaire that will unpack your why. It's pretty cool. It plots your motivations on a chart like so. It explains the 6 motivation groups that I sort of just hinted at, and it breaks each group into 2 components. For example, in the social component, you might be high in competition like me, but lower in community. In achievement, you might be largely motivated to complete or collect things like in-game trinkets or achievements or livestock. Or you might be motivated to simply feel powerful through the use of hidden weapons and power-ups. You might be both. You might be neither. But this is how it breaks down, and depending on your stats, you're assigned 1 or more gamer types. I'm a gladiator and a bard. I want a skill-based yet complex experience, and I also really crave a grand story full of lore, discovery, and customization. The survey is really well done, and if you answer honestly, it teaches you quite a bit about yourself. Link down below if at any point you'd like to take it. But on a larger scale, there are some fascinating insights from Quantic's over 1.7 million gamer responses to this profile. If I asked you what you thought the #1 reason people tend to play video games was across the board, what would you say? I would have guessed challenge or fantasy or strategy, but as it turns out, completion is the #1 most common motivation. Shout out to the thing getters. And if you slice up the populations, you start to see little rays of human nature peeking through. Women tend to care about fantasy, design, and completion the very most, but men tend to seek competition, destruction, and completion the most. Though men's motivations are much more level across the board, women and those who identify as non-binary have these drop-offs where they clearly care most about their top motivations much more than the rest. Their scores are far more polarized. Age has an interesting role as well. Competition is massive for gamers between 13 and 25, but for those over 36, competition tends to be less alluring. But as you hear all of this data, your mind begins to run wild with speculation. Why is strategy so low for younger gamers, but so much higher for older gamers? Why is competition so much more important for men than it is for women? Why would completion be the most common motivation? Is it because of some underlying nature we all have that drives the desire to have things or finish tasks? Or is it because games have taught us for decades that collecting and completing is what we do with them? And it's questions like these that we are going to unpack today, because the finding that I find the most interesting, and in fact the graph you probably saw in the thumbnail, is in regards to this question. What motivation do you think has changed the most in the past decade? What you're looking at is a steady decline in the average strategy motivation score for gamers beginning in June 2015 and ending in April of 2024. And this is the only motivation that has declined like this. All others have either remained stable or deviated less drastically in the last 9 years. Strategy is the only exception. And because graphs can be deceiving, let's be clear, it's plotted here over time as a percentile. These values only exist as measures of people that are relative to other people, so these scores are being compared to the known group average. And after starting above the 50th percentile in 2015, it has now dropped to the 33rd as of April 2024. For perspective, if you do this exact same percentile drop on other large datasets, you get some disturbing figures. This drop is the equivalent of all men aged 20 and older in the US losing 19 pounds in weight. It's proportionate to adult men across the world losing 1.31 inches in height. It's as if everyone on Earth lost 6.6 points of IQ. To put it frankly, Quantic says that 67% of gamers today care less about strategic thinking and planning when playing games than the average gamer back in June of 2015. And this information, much like the other findings, makes your mind explode with questions. How did this happen? Are strategy games dying? Wait, is it going back up now? Did COVID affect this? Are we changing, or is the gaming market? And I want to unpack every bit of that for you today, as well as get your thoughts in the comments. So if you'll indulge me, I'd love to quickly tell you about today's sponsor, Boot.Dev, and then we'll dive right in. One of the things we're going to talk about today is how games keep players engaged, specifically how often we are rewarded. A good gameplay loop will of course provide you with something fun to do, but it will also dangle shiny things in front of you that not only keep you motivated, but also make future interactions in the game all the more interesting. And it's this philosophy that Boot.Dev uses to teach you how to code. If you've ever been interested in learning Python, SQL, or Go, or even have no clue what those words mean but I've piqued your curiosity, imagine learning about these things and building a real marketable skill like coding, all while being rewarded for it just like you would in a video game. Because Boot.Dev follows this methodology as well. Lessons are formatted like a gameplay loop to make the difficulty of learning coding and back-end web development shockingly engaging. You won't just do lessons, you'll earn XP, levels, achievements, complete quests, and fight bosses, all while learning to code. You don't get better at Monster Hunter by reading about it, you get better by playing and spending time with the mechanics for hours at a time, and that is true of coding as well. As with games, Boot believes that repetition, immersion, and complex problem solving is the best way to learn a skill. And if coding is a skill that you'd like to learn, if back-end web development is a career you're interested in, you really should give Boot.Dev a look. Heck, there's even a free demo if you'd like to dip your toes in before you dive in. There's even a thriving Boot Discord community filled with others just like yourself if you get lost, or heck, even want to help others like you might in a FromSoft game. If this is for you, make sure to use my code DarylTalksGames to get 25% off your entire first year of the annual plan. There's a link in the description and a QR code on screen. You know what to do. A massive thanks to Boot.Dev for the sponsor. Now let's get back to the show. When you look at this decline, one temptation you might have is to dismiss this as something else. What if it's not the case that gamers are less strategy motivated, but instead that gamers in 2025 are simply more varied than in 2016? Because after all, gaming as a whole has become more and more popularized. You could make the argument that over the past decade, gaming has become much more mainstream. So what if the survey responses in 2016 represent a more traditional gaming audience than we see nowadays? Could the drop simply be an artifact from a changing population instead of a population that's changing? To answer this, I reached out to Nick Yee, the co-founder and analytics lead of Quantic Foundry, to get his thoughts.
One thing that is important to understand about our particular sample is that we never focused on the broadest sample of gamers. So we always focused on core PC console gamers in our sampling and our survey. A big part of that is that the survey that people take is called the gamer motivation profile. So there are a lot of casual mobile gamers who regularly play games but don't think of themselves as gamers, who don't care to look up a survey like this. And so in our sample, we've always in the past 10 years been tracking a fairly consistent proportion of core/hardcore/casual gamers. There are more women playing video games now than there were 10, 20 years ago. But in our sample, the change has been more muted. We started around 19% female gamers. We're now at about 23, maybe 24% gamers. This effect of strategy declining, it's consistent between male and female gamers. It's the same across the US and Western Europe. The only difference we saw was in the age cohorts. There's a generational effect the youngest gamers saw the largest decreases in strategy, but everyone decreased across the board. But in terms of the proportions of casual hardcore gamers in our sample, that really hasn't changed throughout the past 10 years. There have been fairly subtle changes. So whatever is happening in the data, from our point of view, it's not simply because of the mainstreaming.
So clearly this data is most representative of the traditional gamer over the past decade. Even when the mainstreaming has leaked into the population, it's been a tiny change like the growing women cohort. And I do find it noteworthy that the effect is most robust for younger gamers. My guess would be because at that age, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for impulse control and long-term planning and decision-making, is still developing. This part of the brain isn't done growing until you turn 25, so this finding is only natural, and I'd expect it acts as an accelerant for this population's drop versus the others. But what Nick said next really put the mainstream argument to bed for me.
In fact, we know from our data set, had we gotten a more representative sample inclusive of the casual mobile gamer cohort, we would have seen a larger decline, because we know that more casual gamers, they see a slightly larger decline in strategy as well.
And when you take into account that the average age of respondents to the gamer profile hasn't changed much over the past decade, and that the mainstream audience that would tend to be casual isn't taking this as much as core and hardcore gamers are, and that if they had been, the drop would only be larger than it is, well, you start to realize that this drop is incredibly unlikely to be a result of who is taking it, and in fact, the actual nature of the traditional gamers and what they're playing. So if not diversification, what is causing this? Well, one argument is our attention spans, because while we could go down the rabbit hole of what games are primarily getting made these days, and believe me, we will, this quiz is inherently trying to measure our motivations for playing, not our Steam library. And Quantic measures strategy like this. Gamers who score high on this component enjoy games that require careful decision-making and planning. They like to think through their options and likely outcomes. These may be decisions related to balancing resources and completing goals, managing foreign diplomacy, or finding optimal long-term strategies. They tend to enjoy both tactical combat as well as seeing their carefully devised plans come to fruition. These are all activities that require lots of experimentation, detail-oriented planning, and of course, mountains of sustained focus. There is a reward to be had. The satisfaction of seeing your scheme come together in the end is immensely satisfying. But there is a massive delay between your actions and their consequences. The amount of work you must put in between preparing your units in Fire Emblem and ultimately seeing if you're going to win this battle is much larger a gap than the start of a fight in Silksong and the end of that fight, for better or worse. The amount of time you spend preparing and tinkering with contraptions in Satisfactory is far removed in time from the moment that it finally works, whereas a daily quest in Honkai can be done in minutes. A side quest in Yote is contained and digestible. A level in Mario can be scarfed down quickly, but starting up Civilization and trying to size up how you're going to proceed without really knowing how you've done until many turns later is a completely different prospect. It's not that these games require you to lock in more than something smaller and faster, but instead that they ask you to think much further into the future and be willing to wait for feedback instead of instantly receiving it. And if your attention span is not up to the task, this is going to be difficult for you. Which begs the question, are our attention spans as gamers, or even as a society, diminishing? After all, I think we can all reach that low-hanging fruit right there. Social media is ruining our brains. Or is it? No, it probably is. As much as I research psychology and game design here, I've never had an easier time finding stuff to support this point. This 2025 study found that frequent exposure to rapid, fragmented content on platforms like TikTok and Snapchat overstimulates cognitive processes, leading to decreased working memory capacity, impaired cognitive control, and challenges in maintaining focus. This 2023 meta-analysis finds that those with high use of internet may display less physical activities, academic engagements, and interpersonal relationships with peers and family. Wait, we actually aren't touching grass? Dr. Paul G. Simone, Vice President and Medical Director of Behavioral Health at Lee Health, says that like many addictions, social media directly targets the reward system in the brain, triggering a release of dopamine. Now, dopamine is the same neurotransmitter released in sex, gambling, and eating. The release of dopamine drives addiction. This is all shocking to you, I can tell. All jokes aside, it's easy to point out social media as the culprit here. I mean, after all, if a side effect of using it is decreased working memory capacity, impaired cognitive control, and challenges in maintaining focus, then yeah, I think we can say with confidence that this is a massive factor behind that decline. In fact, if we plot the rise of social media against the decline in strategy as a motivation to play games, it's easy to point at it and go, But I think what this misses out on is the way games themselves are designed these days, because after all, some games can become addicting for the same reason as social media. Take Monster Hunter Wilds, for example. I had never played one of these before, but I had so much fun playing this one at launch. And it does, in fact, require strategy to take down many of these monsters, but what kept me coming back was not that strategy or that story, it was the gameplay loop of fight a monster, get materials, make new weapons and armor. Fight a monster, get materials, make new weapons and armor. Fight a monster, get materials, get mad because my friend got a plate and I didn't, finally get a plate, and then get new weapons and armor. This constant and immediate presence of a new reward created this almost Skinner box where I was just going back in over and over and over to give my brain a fresh Elmo tickle. The gameplay loop is an endless spiraling staircase of fresh, shiny feedback, and that's fine. Many games want you spamming Blizzard so long as you're enjoying yourself, and I unquestionably was. But games with this design philosophy, I'd argue, scratch the same itch social media often does. They constantly give you immediate feedback for your actions and then quickly give you a new reward to then focus on. Strategy games, of course, give you feedback and rewards as well, but because of the inherent nature of long-term strategy, these things must be delayed. Again, not a bad thing, but much harder to keep focus on if you're used to that instant gratification. And this is something that clinical neuropsychologist Dr. Russell Barkley stresses is extremely important to keep in mind for children with ADHD. He says that the reason challenging homework is such a struggle for kids, whereas challenging video games can keep them engaged for hours, is because
the video game provides external, continuous, 100% consequences for interacting with it, and the homework does nothing. When a problem is solved on a sheet of paper, nothing happens. The consequences are delayed, and therein lies the trouble.
Now, he's obviously speaking about those with ADHD, but by definition, one of the diagnosing criteria according to the DSM-5-TR is difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activity. So when it comes to how genres keep our attention, clearly, strategy is going to struggle the most, and it's not just social media that's molding our focus. It's also modern, tight, rapidly rewarding gameplay loops. It's also, frankly, the rise in technology and distractions in today's society. On the APA's Speaking of Psychology podcast, Dr. Gloria Mark outlined some research she and some colleagues performed where they would measure people's length on certain activities at work. Every time a participant swapped between Word to email to another task, they would mark how long that participant stayed on that task.
So back in 2004, we found the average attention span on any screen to be 2.5 minutes on average. Throughout the years, it became shorter. So around 2012, we found it to be 75 seconds. This is with logging techniques. This is an average. And then in the last 5-6 years, we found it to average about 47 seconds. And others have replicated this result within a few seconds. So it seems to be quite robust.
Through all of this research, we can probably say with confidence that our attention spans as a society are shrinking. And furthermore, modern game design, social media, and the rise of technology are factors in that. We can't necessarily prove they're causing it, but we also can't prove that Tom Brady was deflating footballs, so, you know. But for the same reasons, we can also say that strategy as a motivation to play games is also dropping. We just can't prove why. Correlation with all of these other factors is not causation. So no matter where this discussion takes us, it's unlikely we will find a definitive answer, which is what makes it such an elusive topic and why I'm so interested in what you have to say in the comments. But one other piece of data that I think we simply have to consider is the genre of strategy games itself. Because as I consider the titles that are on my feed, on my backlog, talked about in my comment sections, hyped up on Twitter, expected in some of these big, but wait, we have one more announcement spots at the end of presentations, it is almost never a strategy game. And when it is, people get pissy about it on Twitter. This is obviously anecdotal, but just to open this up, could it be that it's not the motivation that's dying, but the genre? To answer this, I asked Quantic if they had any data on how often strategy games were released in the past 20 years. And by using the Internet Game Database and filtering out games that hadn't been mentioned at least 20 times in their survey, effectively removing game demos and placeholder games on Steam that hadn't been released or that practically no one has played, they were able to produce a list of over 15,000 games with genre and release year included. And if you plot how many strategy games have been released over the past 20 years, you sort of see this shape, a steady rise in the first decade, followed by a slight tapering off in the second. And at first glance, you might go, okay, that tapering off means something. The genre is falling off some. But if you do the same thing with games of all genres, you find almost the exact same shape. What you're looking at is not something unique to strategy, but just the rise in popularity and creation of games in the first decade, followed by a normal fluctuation in the second, and frankly, some slight drop-off in game production after COVID, which is to be expected. But I think the fact that the strategy genre doesn't see some unique drop-off here is incredibly telling. Clearly, there is something more going on than just the genre's health. Plus, another reason I don't want to spelunk too deeply into this chasm is that the IGDB tags strategy with more than just games like Frostpunk or Civ or XCOM. It also tags things like Solitaire, which is technically true, I suppose, but like, is Angry Birds really a strategy game? Is Catherine a strategy game? So this angle is tough to approach from, which is why I mentioned those anecdotes earlier. While the data does seem to suggest the opposite, strategy games don't feel like the big main eventer that maybe they once were. But then, enter a game like Balatro. IGDB tags it with strategy, so does Steam. By nature, it does unquestionably delay its rewards and consequences, and yet, our attention spans and our potential overall sleepiness for the strategy genre was not enough to keep this game from exploding onto the scene. The same could be said of Baldur's Gate 3, which again, while is not a pure strategy title because of all the other things the game lets you do, does in fact have a slower, more strategic combat system. And this leads into my final thoughts on this and what I think is happening here. Yes, in my opinion, our attention spans have taken a blow, and this is clear not just in the data around social media and technology, but also our most common motivation for playing games: completion. The fact that strategy has dropped as dramatically as it has while completion remains the #1 motivation suggests to me that we tend to be most interested in that feedback, that we are often far more captivated by the prize than the process. It is my educated guess that this might be the biggest way gamers have changed in the past decade. This is what I think the decline is ultimately illustrating. But I don't think that this is killing the genre of strategy. In fact, it might have resulted in its reincarnation. Because while the conversations around pure strategy titles aren't as loud as those around Game of the Year contenders or presentation main eventers, the strategy aspect of games is reappearing in different genres. It's being packaged with story, with character customization, with action-based reactions, with social elements and decisions matter. Don't get me wrong, the core strategy titles are still around and are still massively popular in their own spheres, but I think there is a reason that games with strategy that aren't purely strategy are doing so well. And the IDGB data aligns with this. Genres are becoming muddier, and I think it's in that people's why gets a little lost. I have been consistently recommended and subsequently bounced off of XCOM so many times, but you take that same strategy-based combat and wrap it up in the anime style, decisions matter, fantasy setting, dating sim, and sweeping orchestral music, then tie it all up with a little bow, I will play Fire Emblem every single time. Smash cut to the comments telling me why I need to play XCOM. To me, feeding strategy to the modern gamer is like feeding broccoli to a toddler. You might have trouble getting them to eat it plain, but if you sneak it into other recipes, they'll love it and not even realize they're eating it.
And I think we were chewing on this over email as well, where the thing we call strategy has changed so much in the past 10, if let alone the past 20 years, there are swaths of mobile casual games that have the strategy label. There are games that kind of quicken the strategy spread and complexity in different ways, right? So there are games like Expedition 33 that add more actiony bits to the strategy. There are games like Balatro that add a lot of chance elements to the strategy. So I think we're seeing people play with the formulas of 4X grand strategy, but figuring out ways to inject more surprises, inject more. I don't know if you were playing Hearthstone when it first came out versus when they slowly introduced more and more chaotic chance elements into the game. The game felt more casual, but it was also more surprising when you played it, and it appeals to different kinds of players. So I think we're seeing that kind of play and diversification in the gaming mechanics around strategy as well.
And I know strategy purists and turn-based combat purists will look at these points as a eulogy for their favorite genre. If we make these hybrid games the new norm, it could destroy what they love most about their favorite games, and that's completely fair. But maybe in the long term, it'll revive the population's interest in strategy. I know when Expedition 33 dropped, it was polarizing for this reason. Keep your FromSoft out of my Squaresoft, right? But how quickly we forget where all of that inspiration came from. RPGs have had these quick-time elements before, and this didn't ruin traditional turn-based combat. Plus, you can't deny how this particular style was so much more appealing to the typical non-RPG player. Because again, it smothered that broccoli in melty cheese and ranch. Is that a bad thing? Well, that's for you to decide. But before you do, you might be interested to see this. I asked Quantic if they had any more recent data, since right here at the end of the strategy decline, there seems to be the beginning of an upswing, and sure enough, for the first time in 10 years, there was an increase in strategy motivation. And if you plot the release of some of these popular games with strategy aspects to them, you can see how perhaps they are reigniting people's interest in that component of gaming. So if you hated the parry system in Expedition 33 because you're a traditionalist, if you wish people would try a real strategy game, maybe because of the genres blurring and mingling a little, they will. Maybe you have to appreciate your own music first before you can appreciate your dad's. Maybe because developers weren't afraid to experiment a little, we might stumble upon a new why we play. Hey there, I hope you had fun with this one, and more than ever, I hope to hear from you in the comments, because this is obviously a massively tangled behemoth of a discussion, but it is a discussion, so please let me hear your thoughts down below. Oh, and if you decide to go take that quiz for Quantic to get your gamer type, please don't spam how much you love strategy in the responses to save this curve. No researcher ever wants demand characteristics, so answer honestly and learn something about yourself. And also a massive shout out to Nick Yee and Quantic Foundry for taking the time to meet with me and share all of this amazing data. If you like this video, hit subscribe for more videos like it, and consider supporting the show on Patreon like these delightful people on screen. For $1 a month, bloopers, editing streams, creative input, and weekly updates are all waiting for you. A big XOXO to this month's featured patrons: Sayaku, Polly Cirrus, CJ Dusky, Cam Carpenter, Kabuto Drake, Nimue, Michael Clear, and Guns Blazin'. Thanks again for watching, take care, and as always, have yourself a damn good one.